this, and the WECC is going to kick off their meeting. It's been great to partner with them to set up kind of this exchange, and I know that some of the topics that you'll talk about may follow on and build on some of these, but I think it's just been a great conference so far to really focus on where we are able to partner. This last topic, this is one that if you haven't been paying attention to inverter-based resources, you probably should. There's a lot that's been going on in a lot of different fronts. Clearly, from just reliability impact from grid transformation perspective, it's fast. We like to say everything's happening all at once on this front. The kind of dual pressures from the growth of IBRs, along with the increased electrification, particularly in vehicles, the change to the traditional way that we need to plan and model the grid, not to mention a lot of the standards development activities. And last week, there was just a very significant order from FERC. So, of course, over the next several years, there's going to be a really significant amount of standards development on this front related to modeling and performance studies and performance requirements for inverter-based resources. So I think this is a very timely topic given the order that came out last week and the focus that we've been putting on inverter-based resources over the last couple of years. We're just finishing up year one of a 3-year work plan to develop a set of registration requirements for a different set of GOs and GOPs related to inverter-based resources. So we've got a diverse panel here today to talk about it, and we'll let them introduce themselves in a little bit more detail here in a minute. But I think Mark Rogers from the WECC team is our senior technical advisor and lead registration is going to help facilitate this. But we've got Rich Bauer from NERC. Appreciate him coming here. I've known Rich for several years, and so it's great to see you again, and appreciate you coming all this way. He's an associate principal engineer of event analysis at NERC. And then Enoch Davis is the manager of systems reliability modeling at WECC. And then you heard Tim Reynolds earlier, and now you hear him in a different front, and he's the manager of risk analysis. So there's a lot of fronts to the changes on the grid, and you're going to hear a little bit about how we're tackling this as a holistic strategy relative to the impacts of grid transformation. Gentlemen, let you guys take it away.
Oh, perfect. Works. So thank you very much, Steve. We appreciate it. And as Steve said, I'm going to kind of lead this out. And yes, it's called a coffee talk. They wouldn't let me put bourbon or beer, it's kind of wanted to do. But so I have a short story real quick before. Rich Bauer, I've known for about 10 years. And Rich is Idaho, right? Yeah. So, and I'm from Kentucky. So the great state of Kentucky, by the way. So we both worked together at NERC. And when I started, it was just a short time afterwards, I get this email from this gentleman, Rich Bauer. It says, "Hey, Plowboy." So I said, "Plowboy?" So he said, "Yeah." So later on, I asked him, and I went on and responded to his, I said, "Plowboy?" He goes, "Yeah, you're from Kentucky. They just use them to plow. We ride horses out here in Idaho." And I said, "What about Kentucky Derby?" "Oh, they just bring those horses in to race." So, that was my greetings at NERC. So when I went to work there. Anyways, we're going to talk a little bit about IBR. And this is kind of a quick, I've been told to speak in the mic. So this is going to be a quick run through. We're going to do about 5 minutes a piece, but we want it to be interactive. So please come up to the mics, ask questions. Let's talk about this and let's get started. So the agenda is what you will learn and why it matters. So, and how we arrived here. Where are we today? How will this affect regional studies and what are the risks? So what you'll learn and why it matters is to learn about the benefits of registering a non-BES inverter-based resource and complexity of the IBR system. We're going to discover how IBRs affect system reliability, security, reliance, resiliency. Representatives from NERC and WECC will provide unified perspectives on IBR. Apparently I didn't I need that bourbon. It all started with the blue cut, and I'm going to let Mr. Rich Bauer talk about that.
Yeah, so, how did we get here, right? So from my perspective, it all started with the blue cut fire disturbance. I would be surprised if very many people in the room were not familiar with that now infamous disturbance. And I remember it well, right? It was a hot sunny day in August when I became aware of this disturbance out in the West. And so, how did that start it? Well, one of the things that it started is that, so it started with blue cut, and I believe we're getting, if we haven't published number 10 yet, we're very, very close to publishing our 10th disturbance report for basically inverter-based resource loss on the system, unplanned inverter-based resource loss on the system. And so we've learned a tremendous amount since August of 2016 with that first blue cut disturbance, and what did we learn? So, I'm going to give you how many people are familiar with, the ESPN, the fastest 3 minutes in sports, right? I'm going to give you the fastest 3 minutes in IBR disturbance reporting now. So the very first thing we learned, which to a utility person is very unique, right? So we're talking with all of these solar facility and inverter OEM people, and we asked them, we said, so why did you trip during that disturbance? And they looked at us and they said, well, we didn't trip. We just quit we quit injecting current. We blocked. And so, for an old utility guy, I hear that and I'm like, how is that not a trip, right? And so that term momentary cessation, that was when we first learned of that. What is momentary cessation and what does that mean and what are the impacts on the system? So the other thing that we learned is that they really took PRC 24 as a requirement, or in other words, outside the curve, they interpreted that as must trip, not may trip. And that presented problems. We IEEE 1547, for those that are familiar with that, those are distribution standards for connecting facilities on the distribution system. We discovered that they were bringing 1547 type philosophy to the transmission system. And of course, that doesn't work real well, right? Because there's very different needs on the distribution system as opposed to the transmission system. Modeling, we've identified that, modeling and models are a huge, I'll say a risk to the system right now, but really there's a huge gap in models and modeling that we need to continue to work on. Everybody knows about RPS. We're getting more and more and more. Every day we're getting more and more. And so the problem is growing, or at least the risk for problems are growing. We've identified the FERC GIA process, FERC generator interconnection agreements. We've identified that we really need to make some changes there. FERC did, came out with their landmark order this year, 2023, order 2023, and they did make significant changes in that. But one of the things that I think we have to be very conscious about is this need for speed, right? In the interconnection procedure, they want speed. And I think we have to be conscious and not sacrifice reliability for speed. And then the last item that I'll mention today, and I'm sure we'll talk about more later, is that we do see that facilities are getting smaller. Initially we saw large 200, 300, 400, 500 megawatt IBR facilities. And I think with wind, we're still seeing large ones like that. But on the solar side of the house, we're seeing them get quite a bit smaller. Hence, the registration process or the registration change that I'm sure Mark is going to talk about in depth later. So anyway, those are kind of the high level and that 3 minute, fastest 3 minutes in sports there, but we'll be glad to talk about later. So, and I'm going to hand it off to, is that you? That's you. We're going back this way.
Thank you. So, Rich, I want to ask you a quick question. So when you say smaller, and we're narrowing in on the proposed 60 kV and 20 MVA, is that what we've actually put in front of FERC?
Yeah, yeah.
We're
So,
going to put in front of FERC.
yeah. So what I can tell you, Mark, is that, so of course, the current BES registration is greater than 75 MVA, right? If we're going to talk about dispersed power resources, at the end of the day, it's the 75 MVA is the threshold that really puts them in or puts them out or doesn't put them in. And I think if some of you may have seen, NERC has put some information together. And I think if they look at like existing facilities, 14% are in that 20 to 75 range. But, you know, I went out and I looked at EIA data because I figured you were going to ask this question. So I went and looked yesterday at EIA data. And if I look at the last 3 years, the number of solar facilities that have gone online, 2/3 are greater than 20 and less than 75 and 1/3 greater than 75. So I think if you look at the last 3 years, the definite trend is for
Quick.
between 20 and 75. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Rich. Appreciate it. So where are we today? And so I want to give a little bit of an update, and you'll only hear it at WECC. I have some real-time, almost close to real-time information. I was on a IBR call with the ORCG about 2 hours ago. So some of this has changed a little bit. And what we're looking at right now is the final phase of proposed provisions of the NERC Rules of Procedures for Appendices 2, 5A, and 5B. That ended yesterday for comments. And there's actually positive comments, and there's just a few that we're going to respond to. And that will take place during November and December. And we were going to shoot for the Board of Trustees, NERC Board of Trustees in December, but that's now going to change to February. So somewhere around March, April, we hope to have it in front of FERC. So that's kind of and what I'm showing right here is the current NERC work plan phase. It's the 3-year work plan that went together. And then WECC is basically mirroring that to some degree. And then we'll step in with our own work plan and work on it. Here is the NERC Organizational Registration and Organization Certification webpage. I would there's a link in there if you have the presentation. I would highly recommend going to it. And particularly if you've not gone through the IBR webinar series and frequently asked questions, I would encourage that very much. And the Inverter-Based Resource Performance Subcommittee website, I would encourage you to go to that. Rich was part of the IBR series, right? So, yeah. So I would highly encourage going through that whole series. It's 11 webinar series. It's really good. All right. So how will this affect regional studies? I think we're going to throw it over to Enoch.
Yeah, thanks. So IBRs have, since Blue Cup Fire, been really a highlight of my world and modeling and looking at how the system reacts to things. As Rich was pointing out, a lot of these are expected to come online. A lot have come online. And, you know, I think if you just look at RPS standards and all the other things going on, it's probably what we're going to see the majority of future resources being. So we need to get those right and make sure that they are accurate and all that. So you're going to hear about EMT from a couple perspectives. One is Mod 32. So Mod 32 is our standard to collect and develop interconnection-wide base cases. WECC is the designated Mod 32 case builder. And as part of that, we have an agreement with NERC that identifies specific things that we need to collect. EMT has just been added to that as of, it's been about six months ago, a year ago-ish. So we are now starting to try and figure out what we're calling EMT zones. And so I guess just to paint the picture a little bit, EMT is a little too detailed to try and do an interconnection-wide base case, you know, like here's your interconnection-wide EMT model. That's probably not feasible, at least not with the tools and ability of computers today, maybe in the future. But so we're identifying these zones that are, high IBR penetration sorts of areas. That's one potential thing that we're looking for. And we're going to start collecting those from the various entities that would have that information. There's a few entities I'm aware of that have really started to collect this information, built it into their interconnection agreements. And as Rich pointed out, that's one of the things that NERC and WECC have been talking about, is how we can make sure this data is available and people have it on hand so that we can ask for it. So there are entities now that are building that into their interconnection agreements, that you have to provide not only your traditional, power flow, transient stability model, but also an EMT model, so that information is available. Another aspect is inertia. A lot of people have, looked at inertia in a lot of different ways. Is there a minimum amount of inertia that we need on the interconnection? I think a lot of that has been sort of, how do I say, put to bed. Like, I don't think inertia is necessarily what we have to have, but we've got grid forming inverters now. WECC actually just approved a generic model for that we're pretty excited about. And then you've got frequency responsive IBRs also that I think get us to that, but inertia has been a hot topic. And I think we do have to account for how we're going to meet that need from, what we used to get from the traditional units to what we're going to be able to get from these IBRs. And then short circuit studies. WECC currently is working on an assessment of sort of how we see short circuit current changing with IBRs. And I guess, 30,000 foot view, a traditional like gas unit puts out about 6 per unit-ish when you put a fault near it. So 6 per unit of current. So it's, 600% of what it normally would be doing for its current output. And that's how you identify a fault. Well, IBRs do about the same as when it was not faulted. So identifying faults, tripping, lines that are grounded, those kind of things becomes more difficult. So there's work going on to identify how we can, best mitigate that and make sure that isn't causing, protection systems problems. Then ride-through capabilities, you heard Rich talking about momentary cessation. Turns out that's just one of the things that IBRs are doing that we maybe don't want them to be doing. And, honestly, I feel like this is more because we didn't know what we could get out of IBRs originally. It was, hey, here's the requirements, meet them. And I think that was sort of the approach. I think, we've discovered, since these are, much quicker responding, that there's probably capabilities we can leverage from IBRs that we're not leveraging because, we sort of limited them to, our traditional view of generators. And then finally, EMT studies. So, I talked about how we're starting to collect information. Another aspect that you've been seeing in some of the more recent IBR-related disturbance reports is EMT studies are really becoming mainstream. I think just about every entity is going to need to be doing these going forward to make sure that they are being reliable, protecting their system, accounting for how these IBRs interact with their other systems. So just trying to build awareness that I think, there are some entities that are being really proactive about this, but I think everybody's going to need EMT software, start collecting EMT type models. And I haven't ever defined this. Electromagnetic transient, if you're not familiar with the term, but super detailed models of the equipment and the system. I mean, this is like 3-phase models where our typical power flow and stability models are positive sequence, so they sort of look like a single phase model. So yeah, I think that's going to be a growing need, and there's probably more to come on this. It feels like a lot of the disturbance reports that have been released sort of identify the exact same things, and then one more extra thing. Like we haven't quite fixed all of these, and we found this new thing. So there's probably more to come, but this is sort of where we're at today as far as how this is looking from a regional study perspective. And I think.
All right. So what are the risks? Before I get into this, though, to wake everybody up after lunch, right? We're all a little tired here. I had some fun after the presentation this morning as I've talked with other people and, introduced myself. Got some questions of, oh, you work for WECC? I'm like, yeah. So I was the one that presented this morning and everybody, okay. And I'm like, the one about the risks and, oh, okay, yeah. So I didn't make a profound impact as I thought I did. So I will have to say, when I was telling my wife earlier today that I was doing a coffee talk, immediately her mind went to the Saturday Night Live coffee talk skits, if you remember that, with Mike Myers. So ever since then, it's been on my mind. So if I break out in a Brooklyn accent, please throw the flag and call me on it. However, I just wanted to say that. So if you come and talk to me again, I'll just say, hey, I am the coffee talk guy, and you'll know who I am. So thank you so much.
Well, the weeks next time.
So that being said, I've got 4 things here on this slide of what are the risks. And let me tell you a little bit of history getting into this. So working with the RRC and so forth, as I mentioned in the first presentation, the Reliability Risk Committee, inverter-based resources is a hot topic. It's there, it's being talked about. There's a lot of work being done on it. And what we were trying to do when it came to our risk register is, we know these risks need to roll up to something. They're there to try to address a risk, but how do we categorize everything, right? And so we actually I'll put it this much, at least for myself, I went through all the documentation that WECC is doing and that NERC is doing. It took me equivalent of about 2 full days to go through all this documentation and read it and combine it and look at it. There's a lot that is out there. So if it ever seems confusing and complex, I don't blame you. There's a lot that's out there. And NERC is doing some great job of trying to organize that, especially with the webinars that they did. If you haven't gone and looked at it, highly encourage you to do that. So, but as we did that and we aggregated things and when we went back out for feedback and everything we received, we kind of narrowed things down to kind of just these 4 topics per se. So first one is applicability of the geo registration and the NERC reliability standards. Again, Mark kind of talked about this a little bit earlier as well. But the second one is the model quality issues. Some of that's what Enoch has gone over. And then performance and validation issues. So this is one that Rich kind of went over a little bit as well, but we need to make sure everything is performing as they are, how they should be, and that we've got accurate models so we can be able to know how the system really is going to react. But when it comes to the inadequate interconnection requirements and commissioning, that's an interesting one right there. As we're in a room with a lot of people that focus a lot on compliance, it's kind of like, well, what does that have to do with reliability standards? And there can be arguments why it is and why it's not. But regardless if it's part of a reliability standard, what I want to focus on is what we're focusing on is risk to the interconnection. And that is one avenue that can be able to help us to address the risks. So it's just not always about the standards. It's about how are we addressing the risks on the interconnection. So that's where that one comes in quite a bit. So as we went through and consolidated everything, I think our list is still a little bit over 20 action items that are going on for these particular 4 areas that we've kind of counted so far, and we're kind of tracking internally at WECC that will, as we get the risk register up and going next year and have the action plans with it, we'll be able to show some of that as well. Hopefully be able to link things and help everybody to know what's going on. But as I mentioned before, there's a lot of things happening with this. It is a hot topic, and it's something that we definitely need to address. So.
There we go. So Tim and I work very closely together on this, as we do with Enoch as well. He's on the risk team as well. And so we're all kind of intertwined and keeping each other up to date. And the information is flowing between the risk and the registration and certification team. So I think we're at the end of, can I have the clicker? Thank you. So I think yes, we're ready for questions if anybody has any. Yes. What a hot topic. Uh-oh, this might be dangerous. WECC staff asking WECC staff a question. He's WECC staff.
Hey, guys.
Hey,
What
Tom.
kinds of cyber risks have you looked at?
I'm sorry, what was that again, Tom?
cybersecurity risks. What kinds of cyber risks have you considered for what's happening?
Enoch wants to answer that.
Yeah, I'll kick us off. I'm sure others have ideas,
Enoch.
but I know one of the things we've talked about is how we study cyber risks in the model perspective, right? Like, is it possible for somebody to, in the Internet of Things, go in and hijack all these inverters from a certain manufacturer or something, or send out some sort of update or something? That's one of the things we've talked about from a study perspective. Is that something we could model or account for in a simulation of some sort?
That would be really interesting. Thank you, Enoch. I'm from a perspective of scheduling audit resources in the most efficient way possible. I'm particularly interested in the zones concept. Where is the output going? What parts of the Western interconnection are we seeing the most megawatts coming? Because that could represent aggregate risk and a larger overall regional risk even. Mark?
What I was about to say all over.
All over? All over.
The Western interconnection.
Okay.
It's very fast and furious right now. I don't think there's one concentration. Enoch, you might.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in on that. One thing that's really interesting that we've been looking at in some of our technical committees is we're seeing a real shift in like flows in the interconnection. So, everything, California used to be sort of this load sink. Everything kind of just flowed into it. Now, in the middle of a summer day, we're seeing thousands of megawatts flowing out of California, which is a big change, probably largely due to inverter-based resources. So I think not only where things are located, like Mark was saying, IBR is going up everywhere, but how the system's being used and all that, I think it is changing, and we have to be cognizant of that and make sure we're planning it appropriately.
And if you want to see EIA data, if you go in and kind of play around with some of that, they actually have maps of where
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
where the solar and wind, and you can change it to
Yeah.
whatever you want. It's really amazing to see where the solar is located.
Oh, thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
One cyber risk to mention, and maybe it's already on your radar, but what we're seeing more and more of, I think, are non-entity managed farms, vendor managed farms, and kind of no visibility of their access to those farms. They're 100% remote managed by a vendor, Siemens, such as, for example. That represents a pretty large potential cyber risk, in my opinion.
And I think part of the 800 data request we're going to have a webinar on that on November 7th. That is going to pull in a lot of that information. That's really for cross-border, but it's going to also ask.
Yeah, I was going to say, isn't that?
It's cross-border, but we kind of want to know who's operating your facilities.
Okay, thanks so much. I know we have other questions here, but just for my benefit, maybe only, could you give a quick 101 for dummies on grid forming versus grid following? Someone? Thank you.
Like the way I handed that off?
Sure. Let me caveat this. This is not going to be good, and this is totally from the cuff. So there are better resources out there. Please check them out. But so it's really just how they react, right? So grid forming means that it's going to control the frequency and voltage that it's pushing out. That's the main difference. Grid forming really is getting that input from the grid that it connects to, and when it connects, it sort of just adopts what's going on. If anybody has more information about that, I would welcome it.
Actually, I think it's a great question, but my response to that is that I hear that term all the time, right? Grid forming, grid forming, grid forming. And everybody in this room probably remembers a few years back when smart grid was the term of the day, right? And when smart grid was the term of the day, you could ask 10 people what smart grid meant and you would get 10 different definitions. In my opinion, grid forming is a little bit right in the same boat right now. We have no real definitive definition of grid forming. But I think what Enoch said is very, very true, right? I think that overall, the difference between grid forming and grid following is that the terms pretty much define it, right? The grid following, they have to have a grid to connect to, and then they follow the grid and just inject current, deliver real power. Whereas grid forming is more autonomous. It resembles more of a synchronous machine. So.
And NERC did just put out a paper within the last 2 weeks, I believe, it's grid forming. It's several pages long. I've not had an opportunity to read it yet, so. Okay. Yes, sir.
Juan Santos, Colorado Springs Utilities. My question is, as we move forward and we start to look at these electromagnetic transient programs, is the WECC going to be the repository for those models? And if so, what software should we be using so that we can submit the models in a coherent manner?
Great question. We are evaluating options. Like I said during my small part of this, we are looking at collecting EMT zones. We're not going to be looking at collecting an interconnection-wide version of this. So if, say, Colorado Springs was identified as part of one of these EMT zones, we would be coming to you with a data request. And as far as software, we're still looking at that. I wouldn't be able to commit to a specific software at this point, but we're still evaluating what software we would like to use. And I guess along with that, there's a task force at NERC that is looking at helping us, and we're closely collaborating with that group on identifying ways to identify these EMT zones. And, I think along with that, we'll probably be working with NERC to identify a software program, because like you're saying, we want the data to be able to flow in and out to people in the Western interconnection. I think we're also going to want it to flow to, NERC as well. So if they've identified some software, we'll use that input as well.
Along the same lines, what are we doing to capture distribution PV rooftop facilities? Shouldn't that be in our models also? Or right now we just as a negative load, but if we're going to go in that detail, we need to include that in our studies.
100% agree. We've been pushing all of the data submitters in the Western interconnection to make better use of our composite load model since 2012. That's when we released it and started collecting data on that. It's not well populated. I mean, what you're describing, we don't see a lot of distributed energy resources being represented in our base cases, for example. But that is information we're trying to collect more of. We're also looking to collect that information in our loads and resources data request that we do on an annual basis. So I would love for us to get more of that information. And there is a spot to put it in, power flow and transient stability sorts of models.
Thanks.
I would follow up on that just one bit. So once again, great question. Enoch's response was great, but if you're not aware, there is a standards project right now, and that standards project is modifying TPL1, the transmission planning standard, to require DER is considered in your transmission planning studies. So.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Sorry. I'm curious, what are your estimates for new registration, and how do you plan on monitoring the compliance given the increase in volumes of all the projects getting registered?
So, good question. And again, I'll say in real time, 2 hours ago on ORCG, they came out with the numbers that they've used from the EIA data.
Okay.
And we're looking at about 155 current NCR numbers that will have to register under the GO IBR and GOP IBR. We've identified 80 that we don't have a registration for. And then we have 51 that we can't put our hands around that we're going to have to do a little research on. So I hope that answers your question.
Definitely. Thank you. I've got a few others. Does NERC have plans to pull together all of the IBR work and efforts into a single work stream, rather?
Yeah, so the ORCG, if I understand the question, we're working on so the FERC approved the 3-year work plan.
Yep.
But at the same time, we're going to create our own project plan to work that stream with the regions, all the regions as well.
Perfect. Thank you. I've got one more. What is the best way for solar owners to come up with questions? There's a lot of first-time, registrations coming up here.
Yes.
How can they approach you guys with questions?
So that's another challenge with the ORCG. So we'll start, as soon as we get the approval from FERC on our ROP, then we will start outreach.
Perfect. Thank you. And I believe that's all my questions. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
So go back to the second question. Go ahead, Rich, and then I'll say my.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that second question about NERC, and I'm not sure exactly what the question was really referencing, but what I was going to say is that on the NERC website, which you'll never find it now that I realize that. Anyway, I apologize.
It's called Google.
I just buried everybody in their computer.
My IT colleagues just absolutely, I just threw them under the bus. I apologize. Anyway, on NERC.com on the main page, there's a menu item that's called initiatives. And under that initiatives, there's IBR strategy. Right. And that is a document that we have that outlines all of the issues that we've identified with IBRs and what our strategy is to mitigate those. So
Gotcha.
Another reference item for you.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate that.
And I was going to reference, though, also on NERC's website, if you go underneath the committees and then the RSTC committee, they have a link to a document. It's an Excel document, but it has what the work items are for that committee and all the committees that report to them. And you can actually filter by IBR to find out all the different work and everything else that's happening on the NERC level when it comes to these inverter-based resources as well.
Gotcha. Okay. Sorry. Another question. You guys are inspiring me. Appreciate it. So if we have a currently registered, or say there's a currently registered project, will they have to register any differently under the GeoIBR?
So do you have an NCR number already?
Negative. This is a hypothetical.
Yeah. So this is going to be
Hypothetical answer.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
No, you're going to have to register as a new.
Okay. So like a separate.
Yeah, but we'll evaluate, if you fall. So what's on the table for the ROP is 60 kV and 20 MVA is the where we're landed. So where we've landed. So we'll do the analysis to determine.
Gotcha. If the pre-registered project has to be re-registered, I guess, or like almost like leveling up, if you will. I can't think of a better word for it right now for the new set of IBR standards.
No.
So like if it has, I guess, an NCR number, like a hypothetical project.
Yeah, so that'll be a separate registration. If you already have an NCR and you're already under GOP, you will have a GOIBR, GOP IBR registration.
Got it. And if that
at this point in time.
Okay, tentatively, right?
Yeah.
So I guess if the GO, I guess how would that tie together with the GO? Say if they got like separate GO and GOPs, right? How does that tie together under that IBR as well? Will the GOP also have to register?
Well, if you're currently
co-owned or owned and operated separately.
Yeah, so the GOP will have to register as well.
Got it.
Especially if you're separate.
Right. All right. Well, thank you guys very much for your time and great work with your panel.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Whoa.
Steve?
Hey, I have a question about to what extent WECC and NERC have engaged the actual manufacturers and vendors for these IBRs. I mean, they're typically for the majority of the larger installations, HVDC, STATCOM, SVC. There's not that many that are in the business. To what extent have they reached? That's the first question, I guess.
Yeah, so I can tell you from a NERC perspective is we've actually engaged the inverter OEMs at a very great level. And in fact, you know, I've always tried to give the OEM, I always try to give the manufacturers credit because they have really been willing to come to the table, sit down, and I think that they've worked really well with us. And we've been able to convey the issues that they really weren't aware of, and they've responded very well for the most part, and made changes to their product and helped with this. So anyway, I guess I'll probably pause there. And
Yeah, I guess to add on to that, you know, as far as model development and all that stuff, IBR manufacturers are also at the table. I will put in a caveat. There are some IBR manufacturers that don't exist anymore that built some of the IBRs. Obviously, we haven't been working with them, and that's been some of our challenges, I think, because, you know, trying to upgrade or update their control systems and stuff like that isn't necessarily possible.
Right.
yeah, and I just have to add on to that. So choose your inverter manufacturer wisely.
Yeah, I should probably preface this by saying I used to be a commissioning engineer for a couple of them, and so coming the other side. Okay, so that's good. The other thing I was going to say is that kind of leads into what you were saying about them modifying it, is without naming any particular industry, this also goes to the cybersecurity question. Many of them begin development of these with a code base that is common among them, and they build outward from it. Like a template, open project, and then they build outward. Okay, you're building a SVC, you're building HVDC, whatever it is. So that goes into the cybersecurity question. That is a real concern. And then the other part is, have they been receptive to modifying the code base or where it's derived from based on that feedback that you all have given them, or has it not gotten to that level quite yet?
Yeah, so I'll give you one example. So in our most recent disturbance events, we have identified, or we did identify, two specific inverter manufacturers that they were the bulk of the fail to ride through issue. And, you know, once again, to reiterate, is those manufacturers came to the table, you know, we sat down, we talked through the event, they identified, you know, what it was that caused them to fail to ride through. And then in the course of all of that discussion, they went back to their facility, they did R&D, they came back with firmware upgrades to actually enhance the control section of their inverters so that it would be more robust with respect to ride through. So I think, you know, that's just an example of the type of interaction that we've had with them. So I would say that they've been very willing to go back and make changes to improve their performance.
Okay, and then just the last thing, just anecdotally, a lot of the stuff we talk about is, you know, protection, the PRC standard and everything like that. But obviously, as probably most of you know, the control systems are the ones that are driving a lot of the premature, you know, recession, removal of injection of current and things like that. Did any of that go into consideration, the development of new standards or modifications of existing? We have a lot of projects that modify definitions for protection system, components, things like that. I don't believe control system, capital C, exists yet in the glossary. Any discussion about that?
Gosh, I'm starting to think somebody like prompted you guys. But anyway, there actually is a current standard project that deals with modifying PRC5, which PRC5 is the relay maintenance. Everybody in this room probably knows that one. But as part of that project, they just recently posted a modification to the definition of protection system. And the change is including protection elements or protective functions embedded in control systems. So that's really, I think, the core of trying to make that change to capture protective functions in control systems, because then since that's a definition in the glossary of terms, every standard that uses protection system, it would include that.
Right.
So.
All right, thank you.
Oh, you need to give it a few minutes. All right. So I had a few questions for you. Number one is, One of you mentioned, and I'm glad you did, is about the EIA data. And one of the things I've commented several times to NERC on in the balloting to the drafting team is there's a lot of data that already exists that's on the EIA data system that it mentions all the solar capacity that's on all the distribution systems for every single electrical entity in the United States. And I don't know why if we really want to get models, it's there. You can use the capacity data, plug it into your composite load model, and you could use that in combination with whatever the BA or the RC is using for their weather forecasting for the solar arrays. All that data can already be used. It's there. There's going to be a hard time to get each of these individual utilities to tell you all their manufacturers, all the capacities, what's running, what's still working, what's not working. So I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but can you guys comment on that?
Yeah, fully aware of the EIA data. I guess, for a power flow stability type model, we need to be on a bus level. So, maybe that's a substation, the way your entity does it. And that is not the granularity that EIA has. They don't give you, it's by, like BA sort of level. So we need it more granular than that. So that's why we haven't been using that data to populate models for people. Does that get to what you were getting at?
Well, actually, you said it's by BA or entity? Because it's by entity.
Yeah, but we need it by substation bus. Like we need, each individual load to have its amount specified of ER.
The transmission planner will have that information because each TP that's responsible for supplying those utilities has that data. They know those cities, so all they have to do, you might not know it at NERC or at WECC, but the TP who's serving those loads, they already have contracts with all those cities. They know the bus numbers, and so they can get the data right there.
Here. Yep.
So that data does exist, and you don't have to go to each utility and give them a date. What I'm trying to get at, you don't have to go give each single utility a data submittal to request this because they've already got the data that's already in a common database, and it's in the EIA database, and the transmission planner can go to that. So that's one item, and I know a lot of other people have questions, but another concern of ours, or mine in particular, is we as a generator owner and operator, we need to do system impact studies whenever the BA or TO planning authority submits cluster studies to us. We have a lot of expenses, and these expenses are going to go up with the MTP reports or MTP modeling. And our concern is we're not getting compensated. And per the FERC process, we're supposed to be compensated. I know that's not WECC's issue or NERC's, but that's an issue for industry because we're going to have to hire more people now to do these MTP studies. And it's going to be more costs that we're supposed to be compensated for it. And that's something I'd like all of us here that are utilities should be aware of that's something you should be compensated for is all your system impact studies that you have to do because the developer of the project is supposed to be paying that. So that's a concern for us that we're going to have increased costs for that. And lots of other things, but I'm going to give someone else a turn.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I just want to clarify something you said earlier. So it sounded like you said that if you have an existing NCR number, that you will have to add an additional registration for Geo IBR.
That's correct.
Okay, so just in theory, we are currently have an NCR, we have current NCR number. You're auditing us on all of the standards that'll be part of the IBR process or under that registration. So how is a Geo IBR registration different than a Geo registration? You're currently auditing us on PRC 19, 24, 25, PRC 5, mod 25, 26, 27, 32. I mean, the whole list. So I'm confused.
So that non-BES, those non-BES at the 60 kV to 20 MVA. So NERC is currently working on the standards to
Right, but for an existing one, they're not a non-BES right now. Like they're already compliant with the standards. So then if anything is between 20 and 75, they're going to have to be prepared to register as a GEO IBR. And that may be a limited subset of standards and not the full GEO standards, depending on where we land. Hopefully there's some allowance there, but it doesn't seem to make sense that so now you're telling me that my GEO can go register as a GEO IBR that's, 75 megawatts in a month?
75 megawatts in a,
But will just be GEO?
it will just be GO, GOP, what you currently have. And then the new registration will be a GO IBR and a
If
GO.
you're between 20 and 75.
That's right.
Okay, I think that's something that has not been clear in the communication to the industry, and that'd be really helpful for us to clarify that.
Okay, and
But-
just let me say this, that NERC and those adjustments to standards, they're going to present that to the RSTC December 6th. So you might want to tune in there as well.
We're on pins and needles for that. I have one more question. I appreciate you guys taking the time. So one of the other things we haven't gotten clarity on, so if I say this correctly now with my new understanding, if you're a GEO IBR and you are looking at your list of standards, the thing we don't have clarity on and would like to understand where it would come from and when is, will you also have to be compliant with SIP 2 and SIP 3? Will you have to go and make a BES impact categorization and say you're a low facility, assign a SIP senior manager, put together electronic security policy, the
And
whole
that's
nine.
part of this.
Do you have any, can you give us a feel? Because to your point about inverter manufacturers, I've got some Eatons that have got some serious issues that are probably going to bankrupt a few solar facilities for us. But I got some Best Buy parts out there on non-BES that have got to get replaced. And I need to know, we're going to do the best for reliability and we're going to do a great job of replacing and bringing these sites up to speed. But it'd be really helpful for us to understand what the expectation is.
Okay.
So. You guys are keeping us busy in the solar world.
Yeah.
So, all right. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, about 3 years ago, I'd never heard of the term EMT model. And now it's hot, right? That's the hot term. I know NERC's already put out one webinar of sort of some training on EMT modeling. What avenues is WECC communicating? What committees and work groups are they communicating down everything about EMT models and studies to entities? How's that happening? Can you talk about that?
Sure. So far, I guess, a little bit of backing up. Last year, WECC had created an EMT task force under the System Review Subcommittee. That's the group that does the base cases. About 3 months later, NERC stood up their EMT task force, and we felt like, hey, we don't want to duplicate efforts. So really, what we've done so far is dissolve. It's not all the way dissolved. There's a report that's being produced, but it's probably not going to make waves or anything. So we're standing down our task force, encouraging everybody that was on that to go join NERC's task force and make sure that that gets the Western perspective. And then the RAC, the Reliability Assessment Committee, has had representation from that NERC committee come and describe what they're doing. And we've been having those discussions at the Reliability Assessment Committee from the EMT, like what we might need to collect, that kind of stuff perspective.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is, probably 99% of the IBRs connected out there are grid following. Why hasn't there been more adoption of grid forming to date? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, to tell you the truth, grid forming is kind of still adapting, right? It's been used in standalone type situations for a long time, but like I'd said earlier, is really there's not a concrete definition of grid forming that everybody in the industry has settled on, and so. What we are discovering is that current inverters, if you buy an inverter today, it has grid forming capability, but it has grid forming capability according to that manufacturer's definition or what their thoughts are with respect to grid forming. And for the most part, nobody's turning that on or has turned that on because I think Tim on his slide showed, there's not anything in anybody's interconnection requirements to put that on yet. And so the white paper that somebody brought up earlier that we just published, NERC just published a grid forming white paper. I say NERC, but it was the IRPS, the Inverter Based Resource Performance Subcommittee. They published a paper, and in that paper, they're recommending that at least for battery storage devices, turn grid forming on immediately because it'll do nothing but help reliability. So I don't know if that specifically answers your question, but hopefully it danced around it enough that you.
It helps.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Lonnie Eldridge. I'm an energy attorney here in California, work with a bunch of utilities. And so we'd like to know if the 60 kV, 20 MVA band, is that still if it has a material effect on the electric system, or is that everybody's got to register? And then do you have a safe harbor below the 20 MVA, or do you still have to test if it has an effect on the bulk electric system? So is everybody gonna have to register, or still is you have a material effect on the system?
So the studies have had a materialistic effect on the study, but it's more about the IBR inverters that Rich talked about and the issues with that.
Yeah, but I think your question is specifically if you are greater than 20 MVA and connected at greater than 60, automatically you'll register as a GO-IBR.
And that's confirmed.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah,
Well, wait a minute, there's a caveat there.
yeah.
FERC has not approved the ROP changes, that's what's in the ROP currently. They could tell us to do something different.
And if you don't meet one of the criteria, if you're at 55 kV, can you get out of registration?
Both would apply. It's greater than 20
Yes.
and connected greater than 60.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Hi there. May somebody else go?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was getting a time check.
Yeah, sure. Mason is here. Hi, Rich. Couple comments, one question and couple comments. Rich, we have been talking about it, that the positive sequence models and the time step of the positive sequence models are not really fast enough to capture voltage right-through criteria, mainly PRC24. And if you are going to go and use the simulation methods, EMT is the one to use that because the quarter cycle of the time and stuff of the RMS models are not fast enough to do that. We are working on EMTF with Ang and the team. We are just working on the second manual of EMTF with the EMT task force in the manual that we are publishing of the volume 2. We're working on loading a chapter basically to that guideline on how EMT studies can be utilized for protection system setups on balance faults, not only right through, but also the right balance side. Is that a direction that you think down the road? You mentioned that we are going to just basically collect these EMT models for now from the GOs, and then we'll see what we're going to do with them later. Is that a direction you think that WECC is going to take as a modification of the new right-through standard, new PRC24 specifically for inverter-based resources?
I guess I'd caveat that. So we're not collecting EMT models from GOs. That's not where WECC's entering into this.
Independent system operators do.
Yeah, CalISO.
CalISO does. Idaho Power does.
We're looking at collecting EMT zones, which would be, a system model of a subset. May or may not include, your GO, I guess, is sort of the way I'd say that. But we're going to be working with the transmission planners, planning coordinators to collect that.
Reword my question, I guess. Do you think one of the usage that we might take overall as these EMT models would be using them for protection system studies?
I don't know.
Yeah, so what I would say, Mason, is that anyway, this is a big question, right? Big question. So we recommend, what NERC recommends right now is that transmission operators, transmission service providers, that they request EMT models with any newly interconnecting generators. And the reason we recommend that is because we feel very confident that those models are going to be needed in the future. And so it's easier to get them now than later, try to get caught up, right? So we recommend everybody ask for them. Now, when those will be used and what they would be used for, I would say that to specifically answer your question, yes, those EMT models will be used for protection, ride through, dynamic performance, all of that stuff, right? Because as you very well pointed out, for those in the audience that are maybe not so familiar with EMT type modeling, but Mason just said, the whole reason for the requirement for EMT modeling is the time slice of simulation, the time resolution that you run and perform simulations on your system. IBRs are power electronics. They respond very, very quickly. They respond tremendously faster than synchronous machines. And so that is really why the requisite or the requirement to move to EMT is there. And so in the future, as we have more and more IBRs, EMT is, in our opinion, is based on the tools we have today. That's the only tool that will adequately represent and adequately allow you to analyze your system response. So anyway, that was a mouthful, and hopefully that
No, that definitely, because
answers.
I'll wrap it up, Rich. We kind of had a question too, that what's value is in it for me from a geo perspective? Why should I spend that money on performing these studies? And I think there are various studies that can be done with EMTs, from the substation design all the way to the modeling and model quality testing and benchmarking. All of that we are all aware of. But I think this is my personal belief that down the road, we are going to utilize these studies. And I kind of see the direction that NERC is taking, that all of the advantages of performing these studies are being listed in various documents. By the way, that EMT Task Force Volume 2 is a really great resource for everybody. And I talk on behalf of ONG. We have a really good crowd that's working on that document, but it's always good to hear from the other side of the fence, people that are going to just provide those, that, all right, do you see any error working with your OEMs? The OEMs that they're out of business, what should we do? WECC second generation models for the EMTs, kind of like that. How do you benchmark it? I highly suggest that we have even surveys sending to different GOs, that people participate in those surveys and tell us that what exactly they think that would modify the document from an abstract document to a more practical document that people can make use of. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate this panel. It sounds like there's a lot of interest. We did have to turn away a couple of questions, so I suspect these gentlemen will stick around for a couple minutes for those of you who may want to come up after this. If we can go to the next slide, or have me the clicker, please. I'm just going to wrap up quickly. I know the WICC is going to start here in 2:30, but I want to thank all of the folks from WECC who put this together, the presenters from the industry, the colleagues that we've had come from NERC. So if we could all just give everybody a round of applause that participated in the panels. And I hope that you saw that there's really intention here to really connect a lot of the components that we have. And so we're going to continue to work on that. We did get some good questions. I think the prompt and awareness for us to try to clarify some things going forward. In some respects, how do we prove a negative? But certainly we're taking the inputs that you're providing to us and trying to differentiate how we interact with entities, and we'll continue to do so. But we have a lot of good takeaways. We'll bring many of those to the follow-on monthly webinars along with the March training. And I'll just leave you with this survey here. We do ask you to take it. Certainly, there's going to be some of the topics you maybe didn't like as much as the others. It's always a challenge in putting these together because we have a varied audience with different perspectives. But hopefully, you did get something that you took away from it, and we do want to hear about that. And we would appreciate your input on all of this. And then for those of you staying for the next couple of days, just as kind of when you go to a new city or a new place, you want to make sure you're following what what the quirks and laws are of the place. So as you go out and about in San Diego over the next few days, just remember, heard it from me, it's not legal to shoot jackrabbits from the back of trolleys. So just, but have a good week of meeting for those of you that are staying, and we appreciate your time. Thanks, everybody.